Hey, what's up everyone? So in this particular episode, we are going to create our auth APIs using Node.js Express, and we will be saving our data in MongoDB. And then in future episodes, we will consume these APIs using React and using Context API to manage the state. So to get started with, we need to have Node.js installed in our machine. So you can visit nodejs.org. And then you download the recommended version right here because this is more stable than the latest one. And then to make sure that you have Node.js installed, you can go to the terminal. So on Windows, I'll type cmd at the search and open my command prompt. And then right here, you can type this command, node, and then space -v. And this will give you the version of Node that you are using. So if you don't see a version, that means that you don't have Node.js installed. So go ahead, download and install it. So once you make sure that that is installed, the other thing is the code editor. So we need to have a coding environment, and my preferred code editor is Visual Studio Code. It's pretty awesome. So if you want to have the same experience as me, you can download Visual Studio Code. This is what I'll be using in this entire course. Now, once you make sure that your tools are set up, the next thing is to create a folder. So I have already created this folder called Chat App, and I'll open this folder on Visual Studio Code, and this is how I will do it. On this path, I can just click, type cmd, and I'll open that path on the command prompt or terminal. And now right here, to open this particular folder on Visual Studio Code, I can use this command, code space and a full stop or a period. And when I hit enter, that folder will be opened on Visual Studio Code. Now the other way to go about it is to first open Visual Studio Code, and then you can go to file and you click on open folder. And now from here, you can navigate to the folder that you want to open. In this case, it's Chat App, and you select that folder to open it. You need to open a terminal. So you can click on a new terminal and it will open down here. And I'll just close the one that we had here for command prompt. We will be using this inbuilt terminal for Visual Studio Code. And to get started with, we will be having several folders inside our Chat App. One for the front end, the other one for the back end, and then the other one for working with our socket.io library. So right here, I'll just create those folders. For front end, I'll call it client. And then for back end, for Node.js, I'll call it server. And then for socket.io, I'll call it socket. Just like that. So this will be our initial folder structure. And then right now we are starting to work on our server, our backend, where we will be creating our auth APIs. So I'll click on server, and then right here I'll create a new file called index.js, and this will be the root of our application. Okay. But before we even proceed, we need to generate what we call a package.json file so that we can install the various dependencies that we need to work with. And to generate that file, we need to go inside the server folder from our terminal. So right here, I'll say cd server, hit enter. Now we are inside the server, and we will use this command to generate our package.json file, npm init. Then we provide a yes flag, and this will autofill it with some default settings. And then I'll hit enter, and this will create a file called package.json file. Let's wait and see. And there we go. Now we have this file right here. Inside the server now we have two files, index.js and package.json. And you can see we have some initial settings. Cool. Now we need to install dependencies that we need to use. So to get started with, we will be needing our Express framework, which will help us to easily create our Node.js APIs. So we will install Express. We need to say npm i express So here I for install, then express, and then the other library that we will be using is the Mongoose library. So this Mongoose library will help us to work with the MongoDB database, so we can create models, we can save data in DB, we can retrieve data, and so on. And then we will also be needing CORS. So this will help us to communicate with the front end, standing for cross origin resource sharing. And then we will need to add the .env library, and this particular library will help us to work with the .env file, so that we can create environment variables and store some secret data or information there, making our app to be a bit more secure. So to begin with, let's install those 4 libraries. So I will give it some time to complete, and then we will proceed. So it has completed, and when you check here, now we have another file, package lock.json. We don't need to bother about that. And also we have this folder called node modules. So every package that we install, all the data for it will be available in our node modules. And when you check at package.json file, you'll see now we have these dependencies with all the dependencies that we have installed, CORS.env, express, and mongoose. And also we have their versions right here. So versions are so important. So sometimes something might work for me and might not work for you. So the best thing that you can do is to maybe install the same version that I am using. So you can specify the version using the @ symbol. So this is how you do it. For example, let's say we want to install this specific version. You can just say npm I, then CORS, then you use the @ symbol, then you specify the version 2.8.5, and then you space, you say .env, then you use this version 16.0.3, and so on. Now let's get started here at index.js. We will bring in express this way, const express will be equal to require, then we invoke require and use quotes, then we will say express. And now we can make use of this express in this particular file. Pretty awesome. To get started with, we can create what we call an app, an express app. So I can say const app will be equal to express. Then we invoke this or call it, okay? We call express. Now this app will be an object which will have various methods which we will be using to create our application. For example, we can add what we call a middleware function. So this will add just extra capabilities to our application, and this is how we do it. App.use. Here we will add the express .json. So we call this particular method from express, and this will allow us to use JSON data, receive and send JSON data in our application. So this is now what we call a middleware function. Pretty nice. Another middleware function that we need to set up is CORS. So let's bring in CORS. So I can say const CORS will be equal to require, then we invoke this and we pass in CORS. And CORS will allow us to communicate with the front end. So if we don't include it, we might have problems communicating with the front end or passing data or receiving data from front end. And we pass it as a middleware function, app.use, and then we invoke it in here. So we can say CORS, then we invoke it. That's all. Now these are middleware functions. All you need to know is that they add extra capabilities to our application. Now down here, let's just create a server by listening to a port. So we can say app.listen. So this will accept 2 parameters. The first parameter is what we call a port, and then the other parameter is a callback function. And this callback function will have access to two things here. One is request and the other one is response. So we use request whenever we are receiving data from the front end, and then we use response to send data to the front end. So we have those two right there. And then now right here, we can log something to the console. So we can say console.log, just the regular JavaScript here. And then we say a server running on port, and right here I can specify which port it's running on. So instead of using these quotes, I'll use backtick so that I can write some JavaScript in it. So I'll remove that quote and use backtick. So backtick is the character that is near your number 1 on the keyboard and it looks like this, okay? And then now right here, I'll use full colon and I can write some JavaScript here to read the port. So right here I can say it's running on port. But this port is supposed to be a number. So I can create it as a variable here, okay? So right here, let's say const port will be equal to 5000. So by this, we have created a simple Express server, and we can try to run our application and see if we can see this message at our console. So to run our app, we can say, make sure you are inside the server here, and then we can say node, and then we say index.js, and we hit enter. And now you can see server running on port 5000, pretty nice. Now, sometimes this port is not usually available whenever we deploy our application or whenever we host our Node application. So what we usually do is to set an automatic port, which will be set automatic by the online server or wherever you are trying to host. So we don't need to include this specific one. So right here, what you need to do to read a port from the environment variables is to say process .env and then .port. And then right here, I can use double these straight slashes. I don't know what they're called, but what this means is that let's use this port from the environment variable. So this is usually set automatically by your hosting service. If it is not available, then let's just use this one. So I'm including this one so that we can actually use it on our local machine. Okay. Now another thing is that whenever we run this particular project using node index.js, we will need to stop the server each time and run it again. So that we can actually see the changes. So for example, if I make a change right here, let's include 3 dots and save. For me to see these changes, I need to stop the server by using Ctrl+C and then running node index.js again. And whenever I do that, that is when we see this change that I have made. So to avoid this, I recommend that you install nodemon. So this is how you install nodemon. You can say npm -g to install nodemon globally in your machine, that is, and you say nodemon. And the nodemon will help us to automatically restart the server whenever we make a change, so that we don't need to stop and start it again. So I have already installed nodemon, and now once you install it, all you need to do is to say nodemon. And if your file here is index.js, it will automatically pick it up and run the application. So when I say nodemon and hit enter, you will see that nodemon is already now giving us this particular message. And whenever I make a change here and save, you will see that it's automatically restarting and starting our file and giving us this updated message or console log. So make sure you install nodemon for better developer experience. Now, the other thing that we need to do now is to connect to a MongoDB database. And to connect to a MongoDB database, we need to first create a MongoDB account. So I have MongoDB here. You need to go to cloud.mongodb.com, then create an account. And once you create an account, I think you'll be prompted to create an organization. Once you create an organization, you need to create a project. So I'm right here where I have my projects, and I'll go ahead and create a new project. And right here, I'll give it a name. I can say chat-app, and then next. Now here we need to add members to our project. I'll be the only member in this project, so I'll just go ahead and create it. Now we have this current IP not added. You'll not be able to connect to database from this address. So we will be talking more about this address. But now what we need to do inside our project, we need to create a database. So I'll build a database. So I'll click on build. And then we have this free cluster right here, or a free tier. So I'll click on create here, which is the shared one. I'll click on this one, create. It's free. And then now right here, you need to choose a provider and region. I will go with the defaults, and then I'll just create a cluster. So just click on create cluster right there. Now right here, we need to create a user for our database. So I'll just say Charles. Then I need to set a password. I'll set the password. I'll say Charles 123. It's not a strong password, just for working on this course. Then I'll create the user there. And then down here, we have now Charles and the password there. Cool. And then down here, we have again adding an IP address. I will add my current IP, but we will make a change to this because the IP address keeps on changing. But for now, we need to select it so that we finish and close. So I will finish and close. Congratulations on setting. Okay, go to databases. And right here, it's loading. So it's creating everything and setting everything up. As it does so, on this particular path where we have a menu, you can go to database access. So this is, in case you forgot the password, you can create a new user and delete some users. And then we have network access here. Now this is where I want us to change this, and I need to enable from everywhere. It's not that secure, but it is better for development because when IP changes, we will still be able to access. Okay, so I'll edit, and right here I'll say allow access from anywhere, and now this is the entry, and then I'll confirm. So this way I'll be able to have an easier time working with MongoDB. So this is now active. Awesome. Now let's go back here to database. And it's still, I think, setting everything up. But I think we can connect to this particular database or cluster by clicking on connect. And then right here, we will have connect your application. So I'll click on this one. And right here, we will have a connection string, okay? And what I will do is that I'll copy this string. Then we will go back to our code editor. Now, this string is pretty sensitive, like it's something that is supposed to be a secret. So I will add it in our .env file. So I'll click on the server here, click on plus, and then I'll say .env. Hit enter. So I'll call it our atlas underscore URI, and then it's just a connection string, and then right here I'll paste it. Okay, so the reason why this is a sensitive string is because it contains even our password for accessing our MongoDB database. So right here I will replace with the password that I used. I used Charles 1123. You need to set a stronger password. This is just for the video, and I'll be changing or deleting that particular database when we are done. So don't use this particular string. And then another cool thing is that we can add something here that will automatically create our database. And this is what we will add. So after this stroke, after this forward slash or stroke, we can say chat app. And whenever we successfully connect to MongoDB using this string, we will automatically be creating this particular database called chat app. So this is the name of the database in short. So I'll save, and then I'll come back to index.js. Earlier, we had installed a package called Mongoose. So this Mongoose will help us to interact with MongoDB, create a database, connect to it. It will help us to save data, retrieve data, and much more. So right here, I'll go ahead and bring it in. So I'll say const mongoose, and then this will be equal to require. We say mongoose. Okay. And now we use this mongoose to connect to our MongoDB database. So this is how we do it. We will say mongoose and then dot connect, and these will have several parameters. So the first parameter, so we call this connect as a method. The first parameter is our URI, but this URI is our connection string, which is available in our .env file. So we need to bring this particular URI into our index.js file, and it is available in our .env file, meaning it's an environment variable. And we will be using this particular method. This process is available by default in our Node.js to read environment variables, and it is the same that we will use to access our environment variable right here. So let's duplicate this particular line. I have used Alt, Shift, and the bottom arrow to duplicate it down here, or you can just copy paste it. Okay. So right here, I'll set up this particular constant, this one. Let me minimize these so that you see more. So right here, I'll say URI. This is now a variable that I'm creating. I'm calling it here down here. And then we will say process.env. Then we specify the environment variable, which is this one, atlas underscore URI. I'll copy that and I'll actually come and paste it here. So now we have process.env.atlas URI. And then I will remove this. So this is what we have. We are reading that environment variable from our .env file. And the reason why we can do that is because of the .env package. Actually, we haven't configured it, so it won't work. We won't be able to read that particular variable until we configure .env. So this is how we can configure our .env package. We need to bring it right here. So I'll say require. Okay, require. We invoke it and we say .env. This is our package, and now we can automatically configure it by calling the .config method right here. Okay. So now, since we have configured .env, we will be able to read our environment variable from our .env file. Pretty nice. The second parameter is that we can pass some options here. The first one is use new URL parser. Just copy what I'm typing. You don't need to worry about it, and set these to true. And then the other one is just two of them. We will use the unified topology and set these to true. Right here, I'll tap on what we call the .then method. This is available when we are working with async actions. So when we successfully connect to MongoDB, we can log something to the console and say that we have successfully connected to MongoDB database. So right here, I'll console .log MongoDB connection established. MongoDB connection established, just like that. And then if we have an error, I'll also tap the catch method here, catch, and we have a callback function in here. We say error, and we can log this error to the console. So I can say console.log, and we include the message here. I will say MongoDB connection failed, and then full colon. Outside here I can include a comma, and we include our error dot message. So this is good, just in case something doesn't work with our connection. We will see what the issue is. So I will save that file, and this is how we are connecting now to our MongoDB database. So now right here you can see that we have successfully connected to MongoDB. MongoDB connection established. Cool. Now let's test if this is working. If we use a wrong password, if I use the wrong password here, I will save. You'll see that this connection will fail. So let's see. Okay, I need to save this index.js so that it detects a change. Okay, nothing happens. Let's say fail. I'll save. So it's restarting. When we make a change in our .env file, it doesn't restart. So when we make a change to these other files, is when it restarts. Okay, cool. Now right here you can see Mongo connection failed, bad authentication failed. So we know the issue is that with authentication. So this line is also working pretty nice. So I return to failed here, makes more sense, and then save, and also come back here and make sure that I'm using the correct password so that I connect to my MongoDB database. So now I want us to start working on our user registration route. So that is a sign up. But before we do that, we can see the different ways in which you can create APIs or routes in MongoDB. And we will be making use of this app right here in order to create our routes. So we can start by creating a simple route or a simple API endpoint. Okay, after our middleware functions right here, I'll enter and I'll say app. And then we have various methods which we usually use to create routes. Let's see how we can handle like CRUD operations in Node.js. So CRUD operation standing for create, and then this one is read, this is update, then this is delete. So if we want to create something in the database, we usually use app.post. So app.post, this is like posting data. We get data from the front end, then we receive it using app.post here. We save that data in the database, and then we can optionally send it back to the client. And then to read data from the database, we usually use app.get, and then we send that data to the client. Then when we want to update data, we usually use app.put to edit the data in the database, and then optionally send it back to the client. And then we have also app.delete. So in this particular course, we will not be using delete and update. We'll just be creating and reading the data. So let's create a simple route for reading the data or sending back the data to the client. So we can say app.get, and then we invoke this function. Now in here, we usually pass two parameters. The first one is a path, and I'll make the root path right here to be our path. And then the second parameter is usually a callback function or a function which have access to request, and also it has access to response. So this request is used to get data from the client and response to send data to the client. So now right here, I'll make this to be an arrow function like this, and we can do something right here, and whatever I'll do is to send some data to the client using response. So I can say res.send, and then I invoke this and I can just pass a message like welcome to our chat app API, all APIs. So I'm sending a message to the client, and by client we can use the browser as a client, and our app has crashed. Let's see what's up. Okay, we have this CRUD here which is not defined. This was just showing you what it is, so let's remove that and save. So server running on port 5000, MongoDB connection established, so it's working. And let's go to the browser and visit localhost 5000 here. So right here on the browser, if I say localhost 5000 and hit enter, you'll see that we have this message, welcome to our chat app APIs. So that means that we are sending data from our Node server to our client, and our client is the browser here. So awesome. This is like just the first step that you can take to create a very simple route. Now we will be doing this, we will be creating a structure like this, but we will be writing more logic to save data to the database and sending it to the client and so on. So in order for us to create data in the database, we will be creating what we call models and working with schemas to shape our MongoDB documents. So let's just add several more folders in our server. So this will be the folder structure. We will be having our models, so I'll say models, and then we will also be having our routes. So we will not be creating these routes in this particular file, just to make our app to be more modular and not have a lot of data at this particular file. So I'll add another folder for our routes. So I'll say routes, and then we will also have another folder, and this folder is what we call, we call this folder controllers. I want it to be at the root. Okay, something is wrong here. These two are supposed to be inside the server and not the chat app. So let me drag and drop them inside the server. So I remove, and now in our server, okay, something is wrong again. Where have they gone? They are now inside the models. Yeah, this is messed up. Let me drop them down here. Yeah, there we go. Cool. Now inside our models, let's create a new file, and we will call this user models, or user model, and then .js. And right here we'll be making use of Mongoose to create our model. So let's bring in Mongoose. So let's say const Mongoose, and this will be equal to require, and we bring in our Mongoose package. Now down here we will write what we call a schema, and a schema is used to just shape our document. So I'll say const user schema, and this will be equal to new mongoose dot schema. So we are using the keyword new here because now this is a class, and we use the new keyword together with the class to create an object. So this is an object basically we have created using this new mongoose dot schema, but we need to specify whatever we want in our schema. So I will invoke this, and then I'll pass an object, and in here we will have a name. So we want our user to have a name, and then we can perform some validation of this name. So this is, we will have type. The type of the name will be string, and then we will make it to be required. So required true. A user must have a name. That is what that line means. And then another thing that we can include is a mean length of the name. So let's say mean length, and right here we will say 3. So a user will not have less than a name. A user will not have a name with less than 3 characters. And then we will have a max length, and we will have a max length of 30. So if you have a very long name, it won't work. Then let's also have an email here, and for the email it will be a type of string. So we say type here to be string, and then another thing, it will be required also. So a user must have an email, so I'll set required to true. And then another thing is that we can set a mean and max length for the email. So I'll just copy this and I will paste it here. The mean 3, max, let it be about 200. And another cool thing that we can add here is that an email must be unique. So I'll say unique to be true. And then we will also be having a password. So let's add a password. And for the password, we just need several of them. Type to be string. Type to be string. A user must include a password when registering for an account. So we will say, okay, right here I missed a D here, that will throw an issue. So let's just copy this required, then min length, max length, and the rest, but we don't need it to be unique, so we will remove that one. So we need it to be required, min length of 3, but max length it will be wrong because we will be hashing the password. So let's just say 1024. Then will it be unique? Passwords can be the same, no one will know they are the same, so we can just like remove that. So the reason why email should be unique is because when logging in, we will be using an email to identify a user, and we can't identify, we don't want to log to another person's account, so it must be unique. So cool. Now the last thing that we can throw in here is a timestamp, and we usually add a timestamp after this particular object. So I'll add a timestamp here, and this timestamp will just include the date or the time that a particular user or a particular document was created. So I'll say timestamps true. Now what have we done? We have just stated what our document should look like. So our document should have a name, an email, and a password, and also we should include a timestamp to it. So this will be added automatically. Cool. Now that we have our user schema or our user or the shape of our document, we can create now what we call a model, and our model is what will give us various methods which we can use to save the data to the database, retrieve data from the database for a particular user. So let's just do that. So we can say const user model, and we set this to be equal to our mongoose dot model. And amazingly, right here we pass 2 parameters. So the first parameter is usually the name that will be for our collection. So I told you collection is like a table. So it's like we are having a table of users. So here we will have a collection of users. So right here, we start with a capital letter and we say user. Now Mongoose will turn this into a plural form. So it will create a collection called users when we write it like this. It will know what to do with it. And then now right here, we include our user schema, which is this one right here. Now with this, we will be able to use this user model to interact with our database while we are working with our Express and Node.js here. So let's export our user model here so that we can use it in other files. So we can say module dot exports, and we set this to be equal to our user model. Okay, and I save. So let's go ahead and create a route right here. So I'll create a new file and I'll call this user route. So user route, and now right here we can import our express. I can say const express will be equal to require express. And now what we will do, we will create what we call a mini app, like a small version of express, which is a router. So we will say const router, and we will set this to be equal to express dot router. Now right here we can create our registration route. So we can say router, and then we will say dot post. So when registering a user, we are saving data in the database, and then right here we will have stroke register, and then now I'll use a comma, and right here we will have a callback function, and we can write our logic right here. So this callback function have access to request and response. Now, but instead of doing this, because we'll be having a lot of logic, we want to clearly see all our routes. What we will be doing, we will be creating what we call a controller. A controller is just a function that we will pass right here. Okay, so that we just have the entire of that logic in a different file. Okay, nothing big. But to test if this router is working, we can say res.send, and right here let's say register, just that. Okay, and then we are supposed to export this router down here. So we can say module and then dot exports, and we set this to be equal to our router. We save. So we can import this router in our index.js file from our user route. So in index.js file at the top here, let's bring in our router. So right here I can say const user route, and then we set this to be equal to require, and we follow the path to our route, which is stroke routes. There we go, cool. And then we pass our user route. So we are exporting this router, then we are importing it as user route right here, and then we can now pass this right here. So we can use it as a middleware. So we can say app.use. Whenever we are using this, it's a middleware, and it's just used to extend or increase the functionality of our application here. So app.use, then we include a path. So I want us to specify that this is our API. I can say stroke API, and then stroke users, and then yeah, that's it. And then now right here we include a comma, we include user route. So that's how we configure it. Okay, and now when we try to access it, we should see this message we should see register, but since this is not a get request, it's a post request, I think it will throw an error. Just for testing, let's change this to get. Okay, but it's supposed to be post. Just for testing, we are using get. Okay, now let's see if we can get this particular message at our browser. So I'll open the browser. Now to access it, we have used stroke API and then stroke users. So that is this one here, stroke API stroke users. And then to specify our route, because we'll be having other routes for registering user and so on, we must specify this one, stroke register. So I'll say stroke register, and we hit enter. And look, we get register. So that configuration is working okay. But if we use post right here, you'll see that this is not a get request, so we won't be getting this, because whatever the browser is sending through this URL is usually a get request. So if I hit enter, you see, cannot get this. So it's usually a get request. That is why I had changed just for demonstration purpose, but it's supposed to be this way. Now let's create a controller which will have this particular logic of our registration. So at our controllers, we will create a user controllers. So I'll say user controller.js, and then I hit enter. So we will be using our model in this particular file. So const user model, and this will be equal to require. We pass our path to our models, so models, and then we say stroke user model. We can just first create a simple function to demonstrate how we will configure it with our user route. So right here, let me remove these ones so that we have few files there. So right here, we can say const register user, and this will be equal to a function. So I'll make use of an arrow function. This function, we will have access to request and response, and we can do something in here. So let's send this data res.send right here. So you can see this function is similar to this one, okay? So it's the same thing. You can write all the logic here, but for us to see all the routes clearly, it's recommended to use a controller. Yeah, that's it. Now all we need to do is to export this register user right here. So let's say module dot exports. So right here I'll say is equals to, I use an object and I will export our register user. So we will also be having login user, we'll be having find user. So that's why I'm including it in an object like this, and we will be able to import this function now in our user route. So let's bring it in. So I'll say const register user. So I include these brackets. Remember, we exported it inside an object, so we must extract it from that object like this. So register user. Now this will be equal to require, and we specify the path. So we will go to our controllers, then we go to our user controller. Now we have this imported. Now instead of using this function like that, we use our register user function, which we are getting from here. So we are just separating our routes from the logic, which is awesome. So I'll save, and let's use again here get and test it out just for testing. Save, then we go here and let's refresh the page, and we get register. So it's working. Cool. So we change back this to post, okay, so that it work as expected. So now let's write the logic for our register user controller. So we will be needing several packages for us to successfully register the user. Therefore, let's first install those packages, and I'll make sure that I go inside the server. So right here I'll say cd space server, enter, and then I'll say npm I, and I will install bcrypt. So we usually use bcrypt to hash the password so that it is not the raw text that we usually enter at a form, okay, so that it's more secure in the database. Okay, and then now right here I will also install what we call JWT, but it's called JSON web token in npm. So I will say let's bring in JSON web token. Cool. And then I will install a validator. We will use this library to validate an email, make sure that the email is a valid email, make sure that a password is a strong password. So install validator, and then what else? Yeah, I think those are enough. Bcrypt, JSON web token, and a validator. So I'll go ahead and install them. Okay, as they install, we were already bringing in user model. Now we will need to bring in a Bcrypt, JSON web token, and a validator. So let's do that. So right here, I'll bring in a Bcrypt. So I'll say const Bcrypt will be equal to require, and we invoke that and say Bcrypt const JWT will be equal to require JSON web token. So now that we are bringing them in like this, let's start working on our logic here. So also we make sure that this is router.post. Okay, cool. So whenever we enter some data in the form from the front end, we will be getting the name, the email, and the password of the user, and we can extract those from our request here, and they are usually available in the request.body. Okay, so let's extract the name, okay, the email and the password from request.body. And then another thing that we need to do, we will check if a user already exists in the database. If they already exist, then we send back a message telling the client that, oops, the user that you are trying to create already exists. And we will make use of this email to find a user. Remember, we made email to be unique. Right here, we will say let our user be equal to, we will have an async action here. So we should await user model, and then dot. This now user model gives us a method called find one, so we can find users. So I'll say find one, and we use the email as the parameter here to find a user. So we are finding a user using an email, and once we use await, we should have or wrap our function here with async. Okay, so right here I'll make this to be an async function since we are using await here. If we have a user, we will be able to have some data in our user here. But if we don't have that user, then this user will not have any data. So if the data exists, that means that we already have a user and we should not create another user. Therefore, we send an error message to the client. So this is how we send the message. So we will say if user exists. So if this is true, then let's return, immediately return. Don't proceed to execute the logic that will be below this. So let's just return res.status. So we can set a status for this particular response, and the response is 400, meaning that there was an error, a user error. And now right here we say .json. You can also use .send, but .json is much better. So I'll say .json, and whatever I will send here is that user that you tried to create already exists. So we can say user with the given email already exists, with the given email already exists. Okay, now once we check that, we should also check if the email is a valid email, and also we should check if all of these are, if they are empty or not. Maybe we can start with that. Okay, so we are performing some validations here. So right here we can say if we don't have a name, so we use this exclamation mark, if no name, or if we don't have an email, if they are empty, if we don't have an email, or if we don't have a password, we should immediately return. Okay, and we can say return res dot status 400, meaning that we have a user error, the data that is incoming has an issue, and then we say dot JSON, and what we will say is all fields are required. All fields are required. And another thing, we usually have validation both on the backend and the front end, but for your information, backend validation is more important than front end, because people usually can bypass the front end validation, but it's hard to bypass the backend validation. Okay, so make sure to usually write some, even if it's some basic validation, it's good. Now after that, we should also check if email is valid and also if password is a strong password. Now for those cases is where we are going to use this library called validator. It's pretty easy to use, and we will say like this: if we can say validator dot is email, and we pass our email here, and this email is the one that we are getting from the request body. So if this is a valid email, it's the correct format, so this usually returns true. So what we are supposed to do, we are supposed to say if it's not a valid email, so if this check validator.isEmail returns false, that is not a valid email, so we iterate that false with this exclamation mark for it to give true. So if it's not a valid email, now this check will be true, and therefore we should not proceed with the execution of our code, and we should immediately return. So right here we return, and whatever we will return is res dot status again, and we say 400, and then we say dot JSON, and whatever we will say is email must be a valid email. So email must be a valid email. Valid email. Just like that. Okay. Now we will also do a similar thing for our password. So I'll highlight this. Use Alt Shift and the bottom arrow on Windows to duplicate that line. Now we will have a validator dot is strong password. Strong password, and then right here we pass in our password like that, and we will return res.status. Right here we include 400.json. Now we change the message that the password must be a strong password. So a strong password means that we should have at least one small character, one uppercase character, a number, and a special case character. So you can specify that right here if you want, but I won't. I just want it to be simple. Must be a strong password like that. So validator makes it easy for us to validate the password and the email. You can see this is very simple to use. Now after this is when we are going to create a user and try to save that user to the database. So right here, this user, we were getting the user, but if we don't get this user, means that this user will not have anything. It will be either undefined or null, but it won't have the data for the user. So if we don't have the data, this will pass, like we will proceed to the next check. If everything is there, we proceed to the next check. If everything is okay, now we save this user, or we create this user and save the user to the database. So this is how we create the user. We will say user. So remember, we are just using user because we have already defined it here as a variable using let. So we can redefine it here. we will say user is equals to, now we will use the new keyword and make use of our user model. So we will say user model, and then now right here we will pass the data that we want our user document to have. So we want it to have the name, the email, and the password. So we pass all those here, and now this user object is our user document. Okay, so we have created it, and all that remains is to save it to the database. And we have an issue here, this should be password. Cool. But before we save this user to the database, we need to hash the password. Okay, to hash the password, we will make use of this package we imported here called bcrypt. So let's do this. We will create what we call a salt. So const salt, and we set this to be equal to await. So we say await, and then bcrypt dot, we have a method called gen salt, and we pass the number of characters that we want this salt to contain. So this is just a random string of characters that makes it hard for people to, like, you know, decode the password. So you can pass as many number of characters that you want, but the default is usually 10. So I'll just pass 10 right there. So now that we have the salt here, a random string of 10 characters right there, we can use it to hash the password. And right here, we can get our user. This document already contains the name, the email, and the password. So we can use it directly like this, user.password. So this will hash our password directly inside our user, and then we will set it to be equal to await. So this is an async action, bcrypt, and we use the method called hash. We invoke it, and whatever we want to hash is our user password. So I can say again here user.password, or you can just pass the password directly. And then this is the first character, the second character is our salt. Now after we do this, we need to save the user in the database, and this is how we can do it. We have our user document, and it has a method called save. So I'll say user.save. I just call that, and this is an async action, so I say await here, await user.save, and now we have saved the user to the database after we hash the password. Now another thing that we can do is to generate a token, a JWT token. We can create a function here for creating a token. So we can say const create token, and we set this to be equal to underscore ID. So we will be getting the ID of the user here, and then we will be using that ID to generate a token. This is a function, and we do something in here. So right here, we are supposed to have a secret key, okay? And this secret key is supposed to be saved in an environment variable. So what we should be doing is creating a key in our .env file. So right here, I will say JWT underscore secret underscore key, and we set to a random string here. Okay, so I can just say super secret, and then I include some random numbers. It should need to be predictable. Okay, now we read this from this .env file in our user controller. So right here we get our JWT secret key. So I can say const JWT key will be equal to we use our process .env, then we access these right here. Let me copy so that I don't misspell it. Copy, and I will paste it here. So okay, Control V. Cool. So now that we have this key, we can go ahead and return a JWT token. So to create the token, we usually use JWT.sign right here. So JWT.sign method, and for this sign method, we can pass some data in here. So this is not supposed to be a comma, that's why we have an error here. So use semicolon like that. So let me show you something. We can actually go to JWT website here. So JWT, and here it is, jwt.io, and you can see an example of a JSON web token. So this is an example of a JSON web token, and you can see it has 3 parts. The first part is an algorithm, the second part is a payload. So this payload is the one that I'm saying that we will pass as an ID. So what we will do here, we will pass the payload now. Whatever we want to be at the payload, it can be _ID. You can have more, you can pass even the name, the email, as much data as you want, but I will just pass the ID, is good enough. And then now right here, I'll use a comma, and then I'll pass our JWT key, this one here. And then finally, this is optional, but we can pass an expiration date. So I can say expires in, and we say right here 3 days. Okay, 3 days. So this is how we create a token. Now we can make use of this to create a token when registering a user. So once we save the user to the database, right here we can create the token. Const token will be equal to, we call our function create token, and we pass our user dot underscore ID. So that ID will be received by this function here as ID, and then it will be added at the payload. So there we go. Now once we create the token, we can send the data to the client. So right here I can see res dot status. So now we have successfully registered a user, so I'll say status is 200, meaning okay, dot JSON. And right here, whatever we will send to the client is the ID of the user. We will send, okay, I'll set the ID to be user dot underscore ID, and then comma. Another thing that we will send is the name, and then the email. We will not send the password. The password should be a secret, shouldn't be visible on the front end. The other thing that we will send is the token. Okay, and then after that, the last thing that we can do in this particular function is that we have some async methods that are happening, and it's good to usually catch the errors. So we can wrap the entire of this in a try and catch block. Okay, so right here I can say try. We open our block and we include everything in there. So I have pushed this in here, and in case of an error now, we will be able to use catch here. So I catch, we say error, and we can log this error to the console as well as send it to the front end. So I can say console dot log our error. Else we can res dot status, and right here I'll use 500, meaning it's server error dot JSON, and we send the error. So in case of an error, we catch that error so that our server doesn't crash. Okay, cool. I think everything is okay. Now what we should do is to try and register a user and test out everything and see if we are good to proceed. So we will use Postman to test our APIs. Okay, so I'll open Postman. I have it installed. So if you don't have Postman, you can just search on Google Postman, download and install it, and then we can use it to test out things. Okay, so once you open Postman, I think you'll see somewhere where you can add a route. You just need to create a new one. Then right here you'll select the kind of request you want to send. Right now it's a post one, a post request. Then right here you will enter the URL. The URL should look like something like this. So it should be http localhost 5000. We have API, but now in this case we are trying to register a user. So we will say users and then stroke register. and that is our path right here to this route, register, then API stroke users. So now we have that. The other thing that we should do is to include something in our body. So the body here, we can go to raw data, and then right here we select JSON. So we are sending JSON data to this particular endpoint. So from this, we were supposed to be having a name. So right here we will write JSON data. Okay, so I open an object, we will have a name, and the name I can say Chaoo. Then we will have an email, so email I can say chaoo@gmail.com, and then we can have a password, so we'll say password, and remember this should be a strong password, so it should have an uppercase. I can say React as the password here, and then 567, and we should have a special case character like end. Okay, so that will be my strong password here. So once we send this, we should get a response, and the response should contain these data that we passed here. Okay, let me show you. The response should contain the ID of the user, the name, the email, and the token. So let's come back to Postman, and fingers crossed this will work. Send, and there we go, it's working like magic. So we have the ID of the user, we have the name, we have the email, and you see we have the token, and we are not getting back the password. Okay, so password, we shouldn't send it to the front end. So our registration is working, and we can check the database to confirm that that data was actually saved in the DB. So right here, I log back to my MongoDB. So there we go. In our chat app, now we have users, and there we go. And I need to show you something. When we were sending a string here, .env, yeah, this is the name of the DB, chat app. And then when we open here, we have these users. Now these users is the name of our collections, so users, and that was gotten from our user model right here. Okay, and then finally we have now this particular document. This is a document, and now this is our user data, and we have the timestamp, created that, updated that, we have the password here, and you can see it's now hashed. Pretty nice. So let's test if email should be unique is working. So if I send again, what should we get here? User with the given email already exists. So our validation for checking if a user is already existing or not is working, which is here. We were using this to find a user with the email. Then if the user exists, then we send this. Okay, let's try to omit something like the name and see if it's working. So I will omit the name here and send. And now you see user with the, okay, it's the same old one. Let's use a different one, like 200 here, and send. And now we see all fields are required because the name here it's not included. So let's include the name. Okay, now let's try to test the password. We omit and a special case character and send, and we see what we get. Password must be a strong password. So you see our validation for the password is also working. So this is working. Let's test the email must be a valid email. So what we can do is open Postman, and we can omit at here or dot here. So I omit dot and send, and email must be a valid email. So the validation is working well, pretty nice, and we are able to register the user. Now the next thing that we can do is to log in a user. It will be a similar process, so let's just dive right in. I'll move a bit faster now. So right here, okay, we will create another function called a login user, and now this is our controller for logging in the user. So I can say const login user will be equal to, we will have async method, so let's just define this as async. We'll have access to request, we'll have access to response. Now you know the drill, so I'm moving more faster so that we can complete the course area. You can slow down the video if you want, okay? So now right here we extract some data from our body. So I can say let's get the email. So for logging in, we will be just having email and password. So I get email and password like that, and this will come from our request.body like that, and I save. The other thing that we can do is to try and find this particular user from the database, since we have the email of this user. So right here, what I'll do, let's wrap everything else in a try and catch block actually. So try and catch. So for catch, we usually have the error object, and we can do something with it down there. Let's start with try here. So we use this particular method here to find a user. So I'll just copy that. Let user be await user.model.findOne email. So we pass the email. So right here, I paste that, and we check if this user exists, okay? So I'll say if this user does not exist. So if this user does not exist, we return. So therefore as dot status 400 here, and then dot JSON, and we send some data. We don't want to specify what is wrong. We don't want to specify whether it's email or password, like a person should be knowing their account. So we say invalid email or password. So it's just a vague message. It's not specific. We don't want to say that the email is the one that is wrong. So we just say invalid email or password. And another thing that we will do is to check if the password is valid, like if they entered the correct password. So for that, we will use bcrypt again. So right here, we will say const is valid password. So this is a variable that I'm creating, is valid password. And right here, we set it to be equal to, we will say await bcrypt, and we have a method called compare. So we can compare the password that we are getting in right here and the password that already exists in the database. So I can say password and then comma, and now we include password from the database. So if this step passed, that means that we have a user, therefore we can get the password from the database using this user here. So we can say user.password. So they entered the correct email. Now let's see if the password is the correct one. So we compare them using bcrypt. It will be able to decode the password that is in the database, compare them, and if it's correct, then this is valid password will be true. So if this is not true, we perform a check. So if password is not true, so if is valid password here is the wrong one. So if this is false, we use this to make it true, then we return an error. So right here we will return res dot status. We invoke these 400 and we say dot JSON, and we send now a message which is similar to this one, invalid email or password. We include it here. Okay, so here we are making sure that we are sending the right email and password before we even give access to the system. Now after this, we should send the user details. So we will create a token and send the details that we were sending when registering a user. So right here, when we do this, we are actually logging in the user because we are sending the user ID and the details of the user. So right here, I'll copy this. Here we register the user plus log them in. So right here, we just want to log in the user. So we get the user from the DB, and if the email and the password are correct, then we go ahead and send these details. Okay, so right here we create the token using the function that we mentioned at the above here, this function, and then now we send the data to the user like this. Awesome. So another thing is that yes, we are doing this name, email, password, but we don't have a name here. So that will be a problem. So to get the name, we can use a full colon and say user dot name. So now let's test this logic. Before we test, we should pass this function to our route, and we create a login route here. So it's also a post request. Here we will have login. Then we should export that function login user here. Login user. So I save here login user, and we pass it here login user. Cool. Now let's test it. So we go to Postman, then this is no longer registration but login. We are logging in with just an email and a password, so I remove this. And let's use a long email. This email is not yet registered in the database, so when I send, we get invalid email or password because that email doesn't exist. If we enter the correct email, the wrong password, we don't have the and sign right here, and send, we still get invalid email or password. If I enter the, was it and or was it $sign? I have already forgotten my password. Let's send and see. Okay, I think it was $sign. Let's send and see. Oh, it's not working. Guys, it's not working. Okay, here this email is not valid. We should say at gmail.com, and I think it was end here, and send. There we go. So we have entered the correct email, the correct password, and now we get back the data, the ID, the name, the email, and the token, and we can now be able to use that data on the front end. So two more things to conclude our user controllers here. We will create a controller for getting all the users, and another one for getting one user, for finding one user, and we will be needing them on our front end. So these are pretty simple. They are much easier than registering and logging in a user, so it will be much faster. So right here, I'll go ahead and create another function called find user. So this is getting a single user, and we will say this will be equal to async, and this async function have access to request and also to response, and we make this to be an arrow function just like that. Now the first thing that we will be getting is a parameter, and this parameter is from our request. So we will be getting a user ID from our request. This will be a get request, and the parameter is usually included at the path here. Okay, so right here, let's first create it. So we will say const our user ID. Will be passing ID to the parameter, will be equal to request dot params, and then dot user ID. And then once we get this parameter, this ID from our URL, we will be able to use it to find a user. So right here, I will try and catch, try. Actually, we didn't include the data for this one, so we should. So let's just copy and paste here. Copy this one, paste it here. It's similar. And also let's do the same for this one. Catch, error, and we paste that again here. It's good to send an error, okay? And now right here, let's proceed with our logic. So let me save to auto format. So right here, we can say const user will be equal to await. And now from our user model, we have another method called find by ID. So remember here, we were saying find one, and we were passing an object which is email. So this is expecting just one. Find by ID is expecting only one parameter, and that parameter is a string. So I'll say dot find by ID. You can see we have find by ID and read, find by ID and update, find one. We have a lot of methods there. So I'm using this one, find by ID, and I invoke it and I pass our ID, which is now this user ID. So right here, I say user ID. Now right here, we will just send that user to the front end or to the client. So res.status, and we have status now 200, and .json, and now we pass our user here. Now this find user should be passed right here. Let's minimize that one. So I pass find user, and then we go to our user route and we create a route for finding a user. So I'll duplicate that, and now right here I'll say router dot get, and right here when we pass our parameter to the route, we will have something like this, find. So this is the route, and then we will add stroke full colon user ID, and this is the variable that we pass to our URL here. And then now right here we should have find user. We click on this, it's auto imported. Pretty awesome. Now how do we send a request when we have a parameter at the URL? Let's see how we can do that in Postman to test this. So this is a get request to this path. So what we should do is change this to get, and then we will have localhost 5000 stroke API stroke users stroke find, and then we will add an ID here, okay, ID of a user. So I can copy this ID here, copy and paste it here. When we send this request, we should get back this user right here, okay? So let's send, and look, we get back the user, and you can see we also have this password and so on. And what has happened is that when we use this find and then stroke ID, we have specified that at our route, that extra part is a parameter with we give it a variable called user ID. Then from our user controller, we are able to get that from here using request.params.user ID. We get that ID, we use it to get the user from the database. I hope that makes sense. Now we will have another one, it's similar. So this is for finding one user, but we should also have another one for getting all the users, okay? So right here, we will be adding another controller. Let's change the function here. So I can say get users. It will be an async action, request and response is there. Now this is much easier because we are not using a specific ID, so we just remove this, and here whatever we will get is users. It's an array of many users. We use await.userModel, And now if we use only find here without any parameter here, what we will get is the entire collection of users. And then now right here we return res.status 200 and we send all the users to the front end. And again we catch the error here, and what we pass here or export is get users. Actually it's get users, makes more sense. And then I save. Now I can create a route for that, pretty easy here. We will say, we will duplicate that, it's a get request, and right here we can say stroke maybe users, or we can just include a forward slash, since already this one has users here, API stroke users. Okay, so if we perform a get request to that path, then we will get our users. So I import that controller here. So I save. Now let's test it out. So all we should be doing is going to Postman and using this URL up to this point. Okay, localhost 5000 stroke API stroke users. So if I send, I should get an array of users. Right now we only have one user, but that user should be inside an array. So you can see this is just an object, a single one. Okay, so I send. So how do we know it's working? If we get that in an array. So I think we have an issue since it's not concluding. So if I come back here and we see we check our server, I think there is an issue. Let's see, it's hanging. So you see we have an issue here. Mongo connection failed. Okay, let's see. I don't understand this query text cluster. Okay, I don't know what this error is. I don't know what exactly was the issue, but what I did, so I came to connect here, connect your application. I just downgraded this version to 3.0, and once I saved, once I refreshed my application here, it established the connection. I don't know if it's the Node version the problem, but yeah, now it's working. Now we can test if we can get our users. So I come back here to Postman here, and this is the route. So I send, and we see if we can get the users. So we get the users, but now you can see it's inside an array, meaning that it's getting all our users in the database. In this case, we only have one user. So that is successfully working, and that is how we can create auth APIs in Express and Node.js. Okay, it's using these user controllers here, and yeah, that is it. So what are we going to do next? The next thing that we are going to do is to cover the front end part of it, where we will be using React and context API to log in the users. So we will register them, we will log them in. We will need to design some forms using Bootstrap and some custom CSS, and we will also be needing to create some routes on the front end. So we will also be learning how to use React Router DOM, and then after that we will go on and start creating our charts. So we will create some endpoints to create messages and read the messages, create chart, read chart, and so on. There will be much more following. So stick around. I hope you have learned something. Let me know what you think about the video at the comment section below. Make sure to subscribe, and if you need the source code for the entire chart, the link will be at the description section below, and the code is actually available on my Patreon. Unfortunately, it's not free. It's just $3 per month. There is a problem getting this page. It's $3 per month, and this is the best way that you can support my content. I have 5 patrons, and you can just be the 6th one here. Let's get to 100 here, okay? And this will be a huge support for my content. I'll be able to bring in more courses and more videos per month. So that is it, and I'll see you in the next one.